In the 1950s, Littleton was a typical small town with an economy based in farming and small manufacturing. Much of what is today West Littleton Boulevard was populated by houses on the ridge above downtown, and further east farms, one of which still exists. But Littleton is close to Denver, and it would soon be transitioning into one of the mile-high city's principal suburbs. Littleton was more than a bedroom community, however, becoming a center for the defense and aerospace industries. This association with high-tech manufacturing, combined with the proximity of Denver, explains how a humble town like Littleton would witness the appearance of vanguard modernist buildings by significant architects. Let's look at some of the best as we travel from South Broadway to Old Downtown Littleton. The distinctive and idiosyncratic Smedley Dental Clinic is an early and important design by Colorado's foremost disciple of Frank Lloyd Wright, Victor Hornbein, who would later create the Denver Botanic Gardens, among other landmarks. Especially notable is that old-growth cedar paneling that miraculously has never been painted. When it was completed in the 1950s, the Smedley Dental Clinic was featured in the National Architectural Press. Raymond Heil's expressionist-style Nichols Hill Chapel of Peace strikes a balance between its theatrical forms and the sense that it is a sacred space befitting its purpose as a mortuary. There are luxurious materials, including stone walls and art glass windows. Another notable attribute of Nichols Hill Chapel of Peace is its park-like setting in a landscape plan that's as modernist as the building itself. Another example of expressionism, but one that is more profane than sacred, is Rich's Charcoal Burgers. Though the designer is unknown, the building is clearly the work of an architect, since it comprises a complex set of sophisticated details, like the wraparound glass curtain wall and the covered drive-thru. This car-friendly feature is ubiquitous today, but it was a fairly new idea when Rich's was built, with the post-war period marked by soaring rates of automobile ownership. The Arapahoe County Bank was designed by a pioneer of Colorado's modern architecture, Earl Chester Morris. The building has a wonderful assortment of interesting volumes and other attributes, in particular those two zigzagging roof lines side by side across the facade. Morris typically designed much larger buildings than this small bank, but he had a special relationship with Littleton, where he lived and where he is buried. Surely the Littleton Savings and Loan by Joseph and Louise Marlowe is among the most artistically distinguished of the mid-century modernist buildings in Old Littleton. The sculptural sunscreen across the second floor is extraordinary. It was designed by Robert Probst, who would soon become internationally famous. The bank is an advanced design for its date, with the Marlowes being among Colorado's most avant-garde architects of the period. Resembling an office building, Temple Buell's Mountain States Telephone and Telegraph is actually a switching station. Constructed of brick, accented by polished and rough-finished aggregate, the grand entrance has a monumental quality. Buell, the head of the state's premier 20th century architectural firm, which earlier designed the Paramount Theater and later the State Services Building, obviously wanted Mountain States to be dignified enough to fit into its high-profile location. A handsome pavilion set at a perpendicular to the street, the Mr. Steak is the work of prominent Denver architect Colin Stewart. The cantilever canopies, with their inverted pyramidal shapes, and the triangular detailing of the window walls give this small building a big presence. In this period, eye-catching restaurants were seen as a way to magically turn motorists zooming by in their cars into diners seated inside, and it worked. The Martin Miller Law Offices has an appropriately dignified appearance, in line with its function. Miller, Littleton's most prominent attorney, hired Eugene Sternberg, Littleton's most prominent architect, to carry out the job. The building anticipates Sternberg's most important Littleton commission, Arapahoe Community College, which is just a couple of years newer. In the Miller Building, Sternberg, working in a brutalist style, converted the prose of cast concrete into the poetry of his elegantly imagined forms and details. The Title Guarantee Company by Joseph and Louise Marlowe sports impossibly thin planar walls. The glass block wall and the glass-curtained entry, set deep within the covered porch, are strictly minimalist. But moderating the severity, not unlike the sunscreen's role at the Marlowe's Littleton Savings and Loan, is the Mosaic by Belgian artist René Hevert. Guaranteed Trust is an extremely refined building that's been smartly inserted into the hill on which it's built. Eugene Sternberg's courthouse building is more flamboyant than his later Miller building. For the courthouse building, constructed to house Sternberg's own office, he decided to show off his talent for composition. To do that, he assembled a vocabulary of details, most emphatically the folded plate roof, but also the complex masonry that includes different bricks set in different bonds, as well as the constructivist patterns of the windows. Like the Guaranteed Trust directly across the boulevard, the courthouse building takes advantage of its hilly site. The Circle Savings and Loan, with its eccentric formal qualities, is one of just a handful of modernist buildings in Old Downtown Littleton. Designed by Laramie and Butts, it sits diagonally at the corner and features curvilinear and rectilinear elements. One of its distinctive details is the sunken garden that reveals a submerged lower level. With its elaborate contours, expressed piers, and curves, Circle is a masterpiece of the bricklayer's art. Another monument to bricklaying is the Littleton National Bank by Barker Rinker Seacat, one of the most ambitious mid-century modern buildings in Old Littleton. With its heavily hooded windows and deeply recessed ground floor, Littleton National Bank exemplifies brutalism. The tower, with its vertical shape, creates a contrast to the horizontal massing of the building itself. Built in the late 1970s, the bank is the end of the line for post-war modernism in Old Littleton. It's astounding that there are so many significant modernist buildings so close together by so many different important architects as there are in Old Littleton. A number of these architects, including Morris, the Marlowes, and Sternberg, were not only designers of some of the city's most outstanding buildings, but they were also deeply involved in the civic life of Littleton, in particular its city planning. These finely conceived and well-built landmarks and a dozen more represent to Littleton and to Colorado an extremely valuable historic and architectural resource.